My name is Hope Newport, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all to the first session of the 2021 Virtual FOP Family Gathering. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. Before we get everything kicked off, I wanted to review a few brief housekeeping notes. The chat box found below the video screen allows you to interact with each other and program staff, and we hope you'll use this opportunity to make some new connections. You'll see a Q&A tab located next to the chat. All questions submitted for Dr. Kaplan will be addressed during the Common Health Questions for FOP Medical Experts starting at 10:10 a.m. To the right of the Q&A tab, you'll see a Wordly tab. To utilize translation in one of the 21 languages, please click the tab and select your preferred language. If you're experiencing any technical issues with this presentation, please feel free to ask in the chat and our technical engineer will assist you. Now to begin our session. I could not be more proud to introduce Dr. Fred Kaplan. I'm sure many of you have already been in communication with Dr. Kaplan at one point in your FOP journey. For those of you who have not had the great gift of knowing him, Dr. Kaplan co-directs the Center for Research in FOP and Related Disorders at the University of Pennsylvania. He's recognized as the world's leading expert in genetic disorders on heterotopic ossification. Dr. Kaplan has dedicated his life to serving the FOP community here in the US and internationally. We are grateful to Dr. Kaplan for the impact his commitment to FOP research and care has made, and for joining the IFOPA at family gatherings since 1991. Thank you, Dr. Kaplan, for helping us to start off this year's family gathering with what I know will be an incredibly insightful talk.
Thank you, Hope. The title of today's presentation is The Twilight Zone: Benefit, Risk, and Hope in Clinical Trials for FOP. This year, I am going to depart from the usual academic formula of laboratory updates and speak to you from the heart. I am speaking as a clinician, a researcher, a principal investigator, the chief author of the ICC editorial on clinical trials, and a longtime friend of the FOP community. Recent developments in clinical trials for FOP have left us all feeling as if we are in the twilight zone, that neutral territory somewhere between the real world and fairyland, as the author Nathaniel Hawthorne described. On the one hand, we have emerging results from some clinical trials that inspire hope, while on the other hand, the same clinical trials have been paused or stopped due to the emergence of serious adverse events, including unexplained deaths or concern for futility. How do we reconcile this? Do we accept it without inquiry as part of the routine of clinical trials? Or do we question its very nature? Clearly, the latter. We not only have the every right, but every obligation to question deeply, and only then can we truly understand the very essence of clinical trials, that elusive bond between risk and hope. Some may feel frustrated, while others may feel relief. Some may feel despair, while others may feel hope. Some may feel disappointed, while others may feel lucky. And some may feel confused, while others may feel enlightened. It wouldn't be unusual to feel all of these emotions and more, as old clinical trials remain in limbo and new clinical trials with new targets close to the cause of FOP continue to emerge. In reality, this is a critical time to reflect and take stock of where we have been, where we are now, how we got to where we are now, and where we are going as a community. A notice for a symposium in the journal Nature recently stated, "Translating cutting-edge technologies into therapies remains a major challenge in biomedical research. The process of transferring promising innovations from the laboratory to the clinic is often tortuous and complex, if not downright frustrating." Clinical trials are not a risk-free journey. A lot can go wrong, and it is not for the faint of heart. We are constantly reminded that there are obstacles along the path, but it is not a journey devoid of hope. Quite the opposite, in fact. There have always been ups and downs. The journey up the mountain isn't always up. Sometimes there are dips and deep descents, but the trajectory is up, both in understanding FOP and in the pursuit to foster safe and effective medicines. Clinical trials require a pioneer spirit, a real pioneer spirit, and as we know, the arrow doesn't always strike the right target. That's where we are. Let's look at where we have been. The discovery of the FOP gene signaled hope, heralded the emergence of a new grammar for drug discovery in FOP, and the explosion of interest in the biopharmaceutical world on the well-defined and evolutionarily conserved bone morphogenetic protein, or BMP, signaling pathway. It signaled hope for escape from a prison of bone, but also risk. Like dominoes in descent, the FOP gene discovery enabled the development of genetically correct animal models of FOP, which have been instrumental in testing novel therapeutics for druggable targets. We are very lucky as a community that such an FOP zoo exists, although the animal models we have are far from perfect. Flies, fish, chicken, and mice are not human beings, far from it, and we need to interpret results from these in vivo studies with great respect and caution. Animal models validated the dysregulated BMP signaling pathway in FOP, the pathophysiology of heterotopic ossification in FOP, and the progenitor cells responsible for heterotopic ossification in FOP. They have given us very important clues, but we must interpret them with humility. Dramatic basic science discoveries, coupled with a comprehensive understanding of the natural history of FOP and methodologies to detect early heterotopic bone formation, further fueled the advent of clinical trials for FOP. The grammar of investigational drug discovery rapidly became a babel of promising new approaches that were rapidly cast on the stage of human clinical trials, a dazzling place to be for an ultra-rare condition that had existed in the backwaters of medicine for over 3 centuries and for which no approved treatment and no discernible hope previously existed. But beware of good news. As Shakespeare said, roses have thorns and silver fountains mud. While dramatic advances showed that the FOP gene discovery could enable identification of druggable targets, it also revealed that drug development would likely be constrained by an ancient and highly conserved signaling pathway that was redundant and iterative, thus making therapeutic specificity extremely difficult. While the desired goal of targeting the dysregulated BMP signaling pathway in FOP is clearly the abrogation of heterotopic ossification, the BMP pathway is critically important in the maintenance and repair of nearly every major organ system, thus expanding the risks of collateral side effects, potentially therapeutic drugs. In addition, there are important logistical considerations and constraints of model systems, not the least of which is that FOP mice are laboratory raised, pathogen-free genetic clones, and are not people with FOP, and thus they do not inherently manifest either the immunological vitality or the genetic variability that underlines both the range of potential efficacy and the range of potential risks that human beings with FOP will inevitably display. Thus, while translational studies are essential to enlighten the way forward, they in no way guarantee an unobstructed path. Potential efficacy and inherent risks, safety risks, need to be weighed, not just at the outset, but continuously throughout every clinical trial. And it is the sponsor's responsibility to make those risks clear, transparent, and understandable to investigators and to patients. Aspirational outcomes of successful treatment may vary from one clinical trial to another based on the mechanism of action of the investigational drug and the predetermined primary outcome of a clinical trial, which must be stated clearly and unequivocally before a trial begins. You can have course corrections during a clinical trial, but your final destination must remain the same throughout the journey. Possible long-term benefits of patient involvement in a clinical trial may theoretically include, but are not limited to, decreased flare-ups, decreased heterotopic ossification, preservation of joint mobility, retardation of joint degeneration, liberation of joints ankylosed with heterotopic ossification, pain relief, frequent medical monitoring, increased self-awareness and FOP awareness, improved quality of life, a pioneer spirit, contribution to a greater good, and contribution to future generations. It is well recognized that childhood, not adulthood, is the main battlefield for FOP. So, why aren't there more clinical trials for children? The answer lies not in the realm of potential benefits, but in the realm of potential risks, namely unintended and irreversible harm. No one wants anyone, especially children, to be harmed in the war against FOP, and no one wants children to be the victims of friendly fire from untested pharmacological weapons. If new drugs are effective and safe for adults, we will cautiously move down the age to children. Animal models are not good enough. We all know what happens if we jump the gun. However, it may be possible to test repurposed drugs that have already been approved for other conditions, and those efforts are underway. Individual participation in a clinical trial must be balanced by a thoughtful consideration of potential benefits and risks. Clinical trials are not proven treatments, but rather an opportunity to determine if a potential therapy is effective and if it is safe. Placebo groups are important. One could argue vital. Everyone wants an effective treatment, but clinical trials are not treatments. Safety is always the other side of the coin. Drugs may seem safe, but any new medication in a properly conducted clinical trial is always circumspect. Even though it is well vetted, it is not foolproof. There are always risks. As the Dalai Lama said wisely, remember that sometimes not getting what you want is a wonderful stroke of luck. It is a growing sentiment echoed by many FOP patients and parents. In other words, being in a placebo group is not always an unfortunate roll of the dice. It may be a blessing in disguise. Potential efficacy is the shiny side of the coin. Potential risk is the flip side. Potential risks may vary from one clinical trial to another. These are assessed based on preclinical toxicology studies, phase 1 trial results, or knowledge of mechanism of action of an investigational drug. However, these assessed risks may not be comprehensive, and new risks and safety concerns may be identified when potential therapies are tested in a clinical trial. One can predict where the known risks may lurk so that they can be avoided, but it is not always possible to predict where the hidden risks may be, or predictably see over the horizon. Common categories of risks include the inconvenience of participating in a clinical trial, especially during a pandemic, the uncertainty of knowing whether one is initially randomized to a placebo group or a treatment group, the annoyance of side effects, both anticipated and unanticipated, potential allergies to a drug, adverse drug reactions, non-responsiveness to a drug, intolerability of a drug, resistance to possible therapeutic effects, and even possible worsening of FOP, despite preclinical data that suggest that the drug being tested may be beneficial. Every drug has side effects, but with investigational drug development for FOP, the spectrum of side effects may not be fully known until the drug is tested in FOP patients, despite extensive preclinical toxicology studies. Even approved and repurposed drugs may have different side effects in the FOP population than are seen when the same drug is used in other conditions. Potential risks can often be prevented or minimized, but even with safety nets and firewalls in place, certain risks can elude prompt detection. And then there are the unknown unknowns, which everyone dreads, the unanticipated and unpredictable risks that arise out of nowhere and take everyone by surprise. Often these risks are relatively minor, but sometimes, to the consternation of all, they might be harmful or even fatal, and it may be difficult to sort this out or find a common thread. Our early foray into FOP clinical trials reminds us what we knew from the very beginning, that clinical trials are not proven treatments. They are human experiments, guided by the best available knowledge at the time the trial was designed and even modified as the trial progresses. Theoretical benefit and palpable risks must be spelled out in informed consent. Informed consent is not just a quaint formality or a box to be checked. It is a solemn requirement of the sponsor and investigator in an ongoing process at every step of the clinical journey. Always read and reread consent forms. Always question everything. Always follow all instructions, and always report everything. Further, patient safety is hardwired into all clinical trials in the form of an independent data safety monitoring board known as a DSMB. The DSMB is required for every clinical trial and is comprised of 3 to 6 experts in various disciplines related to the study drug and the trial design. The DSMB monitors occurrences such as unexpected serious adverse events, or SAEs, and can pause or stop a trial in its tracks if it detects an unforeseen problem that may be related to an investigational drug. A DSMB can also stop a clinical trial early, before the trial is supposed to end, if the beneficial effects are so overwhelming as to suggest that continuation of the trial would not be necessary, or if it was determined that the investigational drug is futile. Thus, the DSMB and the sponsor or regulatory authorities, such as the Food and Drug Administration or the FDA, have the jurisdiction to pause or stop a clinical trial for any reason at any time. And of course, the trial participant has the absolute right to bail out at any time for any reason or for no express reason at all. As one sponsor observed, there is not an endeavor on the planet that is more highly regulated than clinical trials. Clinical trials, as I have said, over and over are not treatments, not yet at any rate. Some may be, some may never be. It is worth remembering. In fact, one must remember that clinical trials are not treatments. As patients and families are bombarded by possibilities and choices, by good news and bad, where does that leave you? For the moment, in the twilight zone, somewhere between an old world of symptomatic management of FOP and a brave new world of therapeutic possibilities. The ultimate gateway of approved drugs is possible only through clinical trials, and patients who embark on that journey are courageous pioneers. And as we have said before, that the pioneer journey is not without risks. Patients and parents must always be aware that there are risks, some known and closely monitored, and some unknown and clearly unexpected, the unknown unknowns. So how should patients and investigators proceed? Obviously with caution, but not paralyzed by fear. Obviously with hope, but also with humility for the unknown. Novel therapies can emerge only from an FOP community working together. Without clinical trials, there will be no approved treatments, and all of our efforts will be in vain. We must advance not just with the power of our collective intellect, but with the intellect of our collective power. As a community, we have the ability to hit the accelerator pedal or the brake, but only if we act together. Otherwise, we will strip the gears of progress and caution as the two are linked. It is futile to move uphill without an accelerator, but foolish to go downhill without a brake. And in clinical trials, there are hills and there are valleys. We must move forward, not just with blind hope, but with a well-informed and clear-sighted caution, not with a red light or a green light, but with a yellow light, constantly blinking. We must join ranks not with vigor, but with vigilance. This is necessary tension of our time. It is the only path forward. So what is the take-home message? There are two. First, and you have seen this before, and it is worth repeating over and over again, clinical trials are not treatments. They have the potential to become treatments if and only if they prove efficacious and safe. They must be both. Each patient or parent must weigh the potential benefits as well as the potential risks of enrolling in a clinical trial and decide for themselves if it is right for them, and if it is, then which trial is right for them, with ongoing informed consent as the guiding light. It is a deeply personal decision. Second, clinical trials are the only path to an approved treatment, and it is a difficult path. Make no mistake about it. But without knowledge, we are left in the dark. We all have an abiding hope and belief that well-designed and meticulously conducted clinical trials will be the path that will lead there. We are encouraged that so many pharmaceutical and biotech companies are developing novel therapeutics for such a rare and complex disease as FOP, and that they are doing this carefully, responsibly, and at great risk to themselves. But the pharmaceutical companies are not soothsayers, and they do not have the last word. You do. Side effects, adverse effects, and even unanticipated effects will inevitably occur. Nobody wants them, but in every case, they will be monitored and investigated by the sponsors and researchers to determine if and how they are related to the investigational drug. If questions are not answered to your satisfaction, then do not enroll. If you do enroll, you must report everything, everything. And if and when risks are identified that may be related to an investigational drug, appropriate risk management measures and mitigations will need to be rapidly incorporated into further iterations of the clinical trial in order to ensure ongoing patient safety. And again, question everything. If questions are not answered to your satisfaction, then make sure you speak up. You are not hostage. You can leave a trial for any reason at any time. Scientists, doctors, patients, clinical research personnel, pharmaceutical companies, and regulatory authorities must and will continue to work together to make clinical trials as safe, transparent, and successful as possible. This vigilance to safety and transparency on everyone's part will lead us together through the twilight zone. In summary, clinical trials are a painstaking process that weigh potential benefits to the patient and society against potential harm to the individual enrolled. And they are based on the painstaking laboratory work on the part of many that has paved the way. Clinical trials are a bold step into the future, along a path like no other, a path that is hopeful, but with obstacles to be sure. But as someone famously said, obstacles along the path are not obstacles, they are the path. Together we will get there. That is our hope. Thank you.
Thank you so much to the attendees for taking the time to join us. At the end of the weekend, please be sure to complete the survey found in the Resource Center and the email that goes out on Sunday, and share your feedback on this session and others you have attended. We value your feedback and want to ensure that we're able to provide great content and programming for the FOP community. We hope you all enjoy the Common Health Questions for FOP Medical Experts starting at 10:10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, where Dr. Kaplan will be answering your questions from this session, and we'll be hearing from 3 other FOP medical experts from around the world.